Okay, so first thing, the camera is reading these pants as ridiculously more red and bright than they are. They're sort of a dark rust. These are the Magic Pants by Ann Tilley Handmade, and they are genius. They are kind of sailor pants. You can see that they've got this. Another odd little trick that I use sometimes is, see how this upper level is bubbling a little? I'm going to put the presser foot down and you can still see a little bubble there. I like these really skinny bamboo skewers because I use them as my squishers, and I will hold it down against the fabric. I'm putting a little bit of pressure on it with my fingers, and now I'm going to sew. And that seems to minimize the amount of pushing that happens as the fabric feeds under the presser foot. I still remember high school sewing classes with the first teacher we had, and my anxious moments when I had to make a placket on a top, and she made me redo the curved end of it like this at least 3 or 4 times, and it still wasn't very well done. What she taught me to do was to take a piece of cardstock, and I could cut a template because I seemed to be incapable of sewing a consistent seam allowance, and sew right along the edge of it. Today I'm doing something similar. I have taken my pattern piece. This is on the pattern paper that I use to trace patterns off of the expensive printed copies. And I marked 1/2 inch seam allowance in from the edge. I then folded it in half and cut it open. So that way, even if my curve is imperfect, it will be identical on both sides. Then I placed the pattern on top of the pattern piece, lifted it up, and I marked the stitching line inside. I decided to try doing this side of this tab differently than the other one. The first one, I sewed it with the knot interface side up, and it rippled a little bit. So I decided I would put the interface side up and the plain one on the bottom to see if I could control that puckering. And instead of using the edge of the presser foot as a stitch width guide and moving the needle over, I'm using it in the middle position so that I can see my needle go directly on top of the line that I've stitched. I've also engaged the hover function so that as I stitch around, I can pause and it'll come up, and I can go down. I didn't have any of that little poofing on this, but one other thing that you can do is you can reduce the presser foot pressure. That's how hard the presser foot pushes down on the top of the fabric, and that will reduce the amount of pushing that goes on. All right, and as you can see, I'm just going very slowly, and every 2 or 3 stitches, I'm pivoting so that I get a really lovely smooth curve right on the line. And we're going to come around here, and as soon as I get around the curve, you get the idea. I'm going to go ahead and just go fast down the straightaway, but you can compare the 2 ends. On this one, I've already graded the seams, and I chose to make the interface side the shorter one, and then I'm going to clip the curves. That's it for this lesson. Okay, this little button on the side of the A presser foot levels the foot out. Normally, the presser foot will go up and down to go over seam allowances, but because I've got a real bulky edge and I want to go forwards, then back up to the edge and forwards with this fold over facing, I need to use the button. So here goes. Needle down, and I am stitching forwards a few stitches. And now I'm going to push the reverse button. Slowly. Okay, so the button popped open. You can see that. What I'm going to do now is lift it up. Put it back in, lower the presser foot, and that should hold the foot level. And see that? It's moving forward perfectly and it didn't pop out, and no more of that getting hung up when you're going over a thick edge. This time I'm going to use the markings on the throat plate. I was nervous about my pants being too tight after making a muslin and realizing that my body had changed shape for the larger size more than I anticipated. So I went up a size on the pattern, but then I added an extra ½ inch of extra beyond the pattern so that I would make sure the pants would actually fit. So I'm now coming back in and compensating for that too much extra I cut, and I'm going to put in a 3/4 of an inch seam allowance. And if you look back here, you can see 3/4, a mark for 7/8, and a mark for 1 inch. Down on the legs, I'm going to make the seam allowance an inch wide, but I decided that thanks to an ice cream belly, I'm going to make the seam 3/4 of an inch here, and then I placed my pins so that they would gradually ease out to the full inch. I'm going to zoom back a little, and we're going to go do the top edge like I did before in the other video. I'm going to go forwards. Now that I'm up here, I'm going to lock this up again and set it down. Well, no, I'm going to have to do that after I go backwards. And you see how the foot tips down? When I lift it up and I push the button in and lock it, hold it as I set it down, it keeps that foot level, and that makes it really easy to move forward, and it'll come undone as soon as the foot is fully supported. I'm now stitching on the 3/4 of an inch, and down here I'm going to move over to about 7/8. So here we go. Now I've moved over to just about the 7/8 inch line, and I'm going to get that pin out of there before anything nasty happens. Normally I put my pins crossways, but in this case I wanted to use them as a seam guide. So I'm coming up to the pocket, and once I get below the pocket, I can start flaring out so that down here, this long blue pin is my indicator that I can go out to an inch seam allowance. Then when I have to finish the seams off with the serger will do a nice job trimming everything for me. I've got the Janome Air Thread 2000D serger, and I absolutely love the air threading. It makes changing colors a breeze. After 21 years with my old serger of a different brand, I still have thread changing PTSD, but I don't need to because it works so easily. Okay, this is getting long. Here I go. Today's sewing video is about using the blind hem stitch. It looks something like this, and there are a couple varieties. The straight edge is for woven fabrics, and then you use number 19, the zigzag one, for stretch fabrics. The machine tells me that I want to be using the G presser foot, which is on my machine, and it has a little blade right here that rides along the edge of this fold. What happens when you use the presser foot is you have a folded edge and the very top side of the hem edge, and the machine will sew along in a straight line and then make a zig. This is using the default with a zig of 0.6, but I thought that it looked a little too wide, so I narrowed it down to a 0.3. You can see on this scrap of linen that the stitches are pretty darn small, but I still thought those were a little bit too big, so I went down to 0.3, and you get that lovely little dot. What happens is when you unfold the pant leg, it slides up the zig, and you get that nice little hem stitch. It's nice that now things are cool and more relaxed and not so fussy. We used to have to put hem tape and do all of this stuff. Now people usually just use a straight stitch, but I thought I'd show you this foot. The first thing you do is you turn your pant legs up the distance you want. In this case, it's 3 1/4 inches, including the serged edge. I pin them on that edge, and you want to make sure when you start that you've got your seam allowances lined up straight, and way you won't get weird twisting once it's stitched. Once you've gotten everything pinned, you're going to fold the hem backwards and expose the inside of the pant leg, and you fold the pant leg back so that you will end up with something that looks like this. Here's the folded edge, and this is the hem. I'm now working on sewing the first part of the pants leg, and I've begun. I like to start just before a seam allowance, get up over the hump. You may need to adjust the zigzag depending on the thickness and stiffness of your fabric. So I'm going to sew a little bit and go over the next seam intersection. The machine will go forward, and as you can see, it just zigs left. And you can see how fast and easy that is. You want to make sure that all of your initial pins that are on the underside are definitely removed, and you only have pins up here where you can see what's going on. Now, as the presser foot comes up to this seam, it's bulky, so I just like to keep a little constant pressure on the back. If the zig doesn't go all the way through the pant on the thick part, you can just go back in and take a quick tack by hand, and as you can see, boom, 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 I'm ready to finish. I'm going to come all the way around here, tuck that back in there so the fold is nice and straight up there. I'm going to keep going all the way around. Ease that into there. You can see here the threads from where I started. I'm going to just come right down to the end, and I'm going to hit the lock stitch. I'm now going to cut the threads, and presto boom, just like that, in a flash, it's all done. And look how beautiful that is. It's got a crease that will iron out from the folding, but you can see just how tiny those stitches are, and this is going to look fantastic.